difference. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Simon.
Yeah. Looking forward to get to know you a bit, at least from the distance. You're originally from Bologna, is that correct?
I am. Yeah. I left Bologna back many years ago in 1991, but I basically lived there until I was 25 years old.
Do you
So I grew
know?
up. I was born there. I grew up there and everything.
Uh-huh. So, do you know Alessandro Altarocca
No,
by any
that
chance?
name,
No.
no, that name doesn't sound familiar.
Okay.
Maybe different generation. Maybe I was left or how old is
Well,
Alessandro?
well, I would say maybe more or less the same, but it's just the only thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking of Bologna because I met him. He's a piano player.
Oh, okay.
So you from a musical family there? Parents played music as well. You
No,
started? No.
not at all. No, my parents were not musicians, but I heard a lot of music through them, although not necessarily jazz. But I always credit my father for having this record of Stan Getz with, back in the days that the records he did with the Brazilian, specifically like the famous one with Joao Gilberto. So I think that was my entry port in the saxophone world, because somehow that sound stuck with me, and I kind of fell in love with that. So I think that even if they were not musician, I part of the love music came from hearing music in the house a lot, and jazz specifically out of this hearing Stan Getz, and the way he was creating melodies and this idea of playing saxophone as a almost like as a singer, like he does in that records, right? That is very melodic and very beautiful and lyrical.
So you
That's
decided to pick up the tenor as well?
Yeah, so that's what made me eventually want to. I used to play guitar when I was a teenager, but then I sort of switched to the saxophone, and then enrolled in the Conservatory of Music, and that was interesting because back then, now it's different, but there was no jazz. Not only there was no jazz as a curriculum, you're not even were allowed to practice anything remotely sounding like jazz or anything inside the premises, and also they make you switch to alto saxophone because most of the literature for classical saxophone was written for alto saxophone. So very much following the French school and blah blah blah. So I did 5 years of that, but I really don't remember that as a I mean, I loved it in a way, but it was not what I wanted to do. It's so. But I'm glad I did it. It sort of gave me a
So
conception.
you got rid of the vibrato, the
Yeah,
classical saxophone,
absolutely. It
different
was like,
style, totally.
yeah, it was like surgery, really. It's like once I started to understand how far I was going from where I wanted to go. Because the premises was, well, you hear those comments from the professor. Well, if you want to play jazz, you first have to play classical music, and I, what do I know? I say, okay, well, and I did 5 years of that, and then my friends that were not going to the conservatory and were playing, they were already sounding like everything I wanted to play. I say, wait a second, there's something here that doesn't sort of work for me. And so I decided to after 5 years that I took the intermediate diploma. Back then were 7 years of saxophone.
So,
Um,
so you study classical saxophone with the diploma?
yeah,
Yeah.
I did 5 years of that, and then I start getting private lessons from local jazz saxophone player. And then I moved to Miami, and I enrolled at the University of Miami. That was 1991 when I moved there, and then everything changed. Everything was different. Also because I feel, as a European loving jazz and hearing it on the records and reading about it, you know, there's this romantic appeal, right, of this music to
Mm.
us as European. But what I noticed coming here that I understood something about the cultural component of this music that I could not understand when I was in Europe, and that was really important because you start understanding that the music of jazz music is not a style; it's really a cultural expression
Mm.
of a very specific, part of America, specifically Black America, and the connection with Africa, and how this music represents something that has a very strong cultural component. It's not just another style of music.
Mm.
And so, looking at it from that point of view, you know, in a way, it's like when Americans come to Europe to study classical music, they understand it from such a different perspective. They can see it, from the culture that
Right.
create the music. So that to me was, beside all, the access to information, the different mentality,
Mm.
how anyway jazz musicians for the most part in America are, to me, much more broad-minded than in Europe, because we're just kind of like, it's either bebop or it's this and that. And here it's not really like that. It's much more, everything connects in a way. And even if you have musicians specialized in one thing or the other, but
Mm.
I feel like the walls and the borders are much more flexible about everything within jazz and jazz within other things.
Mm.
And that to me is very interesting, um, because I do feel that we get this tendency of creating disconnection when in reality everything is really much connected, you know.
Right.
And so as an approach to find the connection instead of to kind of separate things, I
Mm.
think artistically is more stimulating
Mhm.
for me at least.
Yeah. And was the next step, you went to teach in Puerto Rico? Was that
Yeah,
next
yeah,
step? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That
How did
was
that happen?
well, that was that was great actually, because um, it sort of gave me an entry world to what a lot of the thing I'm doing now. And what happened was that, originally my mother is from Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And so at that point, my parents, would travel back and forth from Italy and Puerto Rico, and they
Mhm.
spent a long time in Puerto Rico. And I just graduated from the I just got my master from the university, and my mother sent me this email and said, "Look, there's an opening at the Conservatory of Music of Puerto Rico for a professor," and say, "Why don't you apply?" And I just finished, school, so I was actually looking for
Mhm.
for you know things to do. And education has been from the beginning a very important part of my makeup as a musician, because I always felt, you know, just as a strong vocation to teach music than to play it.
Mhm.
Um, for me, wasn't never because I needed money. It was just like I thought the moment I got the saxophone, I was already sharing anything, the little I know, with whoever wanted to know.
Mhm.
And so that appealed to me, and I did apply, and it turns out that I was completely fitting the profile of what they were looking for. And so I moved to Puerto Rico, and I first started as a saxophone teacher, and I was teaching music education courses. But then I put forward a proposal. The moment was right to create a jazz program in this conservatory. And so I founded this program, obviously with the help of the chancellor. Many colleagues were involved.
Mhm.
But basically, I developed this jazz program, and through this jazz program, I start seeing myself developing a lot of project and making a lot of connections, and the program became, it became a very important point of reference in Latin America for jazz. um, and I started traveling to Mexico, and I started traveling all over Latin America to recruit students. So the Puerto Rico Conservatory started becoming a hub for all these musicians that wanted to study jazz, could not afford the school in America, had incredible talent. They also wanted to have a Latin American perspective and not just United States point of view on it. And so we created this program called, which is still standing.
Mhm.
It's called Jazz and Caribbean Music Program. And so the interesting part of the curriculum is that we were sort of like approaching jazz from from the history of the American jazz, or the history of jazz in America, I should say, in the United States, and the same with the Caribbean music, whether from Cuba, Puerto Rico, and all of the different subgenres, and then trying to kind of make them go parallel, and then kind of how the intersection of the music.
Mhm.
And at the end, everything comes from Africa, so the intersection were so much easier if you look at it from that point of view, because
Mhm.
at the end, all the source of this music is all coming from Africa. So there is so much connections, between this music. It's just the way they can develop in different continents. It's kind of
Mhm.
generate different sound.
So the jazz department was it a jazz department inside the conservatory?
Yeah, we we
Or,
we we built a jazz. It wasn't there when I arrived. It was
mhm.
only classical music.
Okay.
The Conservatory of Puerto Rico, people don't know, but actually it's a conservatory that was founded by Juan Pablo Casals, the very famous cellist
Mhm.
from Spain, that he fled Franco during the war and went to exile in Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
and he created, the conservatory. Actually, he created first the symphony orchestra, then a conservatory to train the musicians, and then the Pablo Casal Festival, which is still
Mhm.
happening every year in Puerto Rico, and is a very famous classical. So I tell you this just because the conservatory was extremely conservative, coming from this,
Mhm.
classical legend, that left Spain, and so it was very difficult to introduce the idea of jazz and popular music. And I I was just lucky that the chancellor at that time, she understood that that was the only way to go forward.
Mhm.
She wanted to preserve the classical program, but she wanted to be very sensitive to, the fact that a lot of young people wanted to study jazz or wanted
Uh-huh.
to study, Caribbean music or
Mhm.
popular music. And she felt that that was important, that the conservatory would create that
Mhm.
space. And so I came, my arrival was the moment was right, because then out of that we created the department. I founded I brought the whole curriculum. I brought together all these people, and then I started making trip and making connection, especially with university in United States, and then I brought Eddie Gomez as a resident artist at at the conservatory. Was never even been invited before. Imagine, it's like, Eddie Gomez is from Puerto Rico.
Okay.
It's like one of the legendary bass player of the
Right.
jazz history. And, he was never even invited once to do a clinic there. So he became one of our, you know, faculty, like he would come every month from New York. And that was incredible. Then I did the same thing with David Sanchez,
Mhm.
representing more of this, modern contemporary fusion of jazz and Latin music. And David was amazing, because it's still one of the point of reference for all the saxophone player in Puerto Rico. And, it's an amazing, jazz artist, and done so many beautiful things with Miguel Zenon, and by himself before Miguel and everything. And then, and so I like Eddie representing more the, standard, straight ahead jazz.
Mhm.
David Sanchez more of the contemporary jazz and fusion with, Puerto Rican music, etc. And then we also got in residence Luis Pericortis, which was this is this, very legendary trumpet player from the Fania All Star, the old
Mhm.
movement of salsa in New
Okay.
York, the 70s. And he was one of the people that kind of created a style of, of that kind of playing, especially on the trumpet, and
Mhm.
arranging for salsa. and all with all these, you know, tinges of jazz, etc.
Mm,
So at that point, I had really something interesting, right? I had like a conservatory that
mhm,
was opening to jazz, but with such a Puerto Rican perspective of having three point of reference, so
mhm,
having major um, artists from Puerto Rico teaching at the conservatory. And so that was something that was noticed, and I did during those years many connection. Back then, we had this organization called the International IAG International. I don't know if you ever heard about, well, international organization.
Educators, you mean?
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so through them, I founded a chapter in Puerto Rico, and then I
Mm,
was in the board, and I started traveling over there, bringing my students, to perform
mm,
at the conferences, and then perform in Chicago. I made connection with John Faris, was teaching at the Chicago Columbia College back then,
mm,
and so we created a partnership with this university. They will come to Puerto Rico and study our music there, and we will go to Chicago. And so
mhm.
it was sort of like, a lot of things happening. I founded a festival in
But
Puerto
you
Rico.
were teaching saxophone and leading the department also.
I was the director of
Correct.
the
Mm,
Jazz and Caribbean Music Department
mhm,
at that time, and I was teaching jazz saxophone at that moment. Right.
right. Mhm. And
And so
what about Dave Valentine?
that Valentine at that time was, uh, I don't know,
He's
he
not
wasn't,
around for that Puerto
he
Rican.
was not around as much,
Oh,
uh, but certainly he was an amazing influence as well. But at that moment, I can't remember why um, he was. Is he Dave Valentine from Puerto Rico? I'm not even sure now.
I guess, yeah. I thought so.
I thought so too. Anyway, we did not. He was not part of
Collaborate on that
the
project. Yeah.
collaboration.
Mhm, mhm, yes. And so you were playing gigs, teaching, like
Yeah,
from the very
yeah,
beginning, as soon
yeah,
as you left school, basically.
yeah. No,
Hmm.
those years were interesting because I was sort of like learning how to be an administrator,
Hmm.
and how to create programs and how to tend to that, and at the same part, creating opportunity or being part of other musical events, and so in a way I start understanding that that's what was really my goal. The way I see myself is not one thing, right? I find a lot of pleasure being performing music for people, and then I find a lot of pleasure to direct a program, and always having these optics of looking what is not there but what it could be there.
So you like to organize things and
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
do,
I
do
love
things.
I
Hmm.
love the idea to be a catalyst for things to happen, and
Hmm.
then to see how these things benefit other people. I think that's really motivates me incredibly, in as a teacher too. This idea of music as a way of human development, right?
Hmm.
So, to have this opportunity to help, especially young people, understanding who they could be through music, and
Hmm.
and and using it with such as a powerful positive tool for their life, right? And be very careful in identify how music could be also the opposite. It could also be teaching you all the wrong values. So in a way,
Huh.
music in itself becomes what you make it be. It's like,
Hmm.
I heard when Shorter saying this amazing quote during a clinic in Panama. Uh, he said music is like a scalpel in the hands of the doctor. It heals, and in the hands of the criminal it hurts. you know and it's so true.
Yes.
To me, it's because we always identify music as a positive thing, but
Hmm.
I mean, there's many examples where music has destroyed life, or kind of like created like very an healthy competition, or you have an
Mm.
healthy environment where musicians, instead of collaborating, compete in a very, you know, not artistic way, you know,
Yeah.
and then you see how music, you know, is used, you know, and what kind of music people listen, and then what kind of art, you know, how music can become this other thing, right?
Mm.
I mean, so
Yeah.
so I what fascinated me in a position of what I was practicing to become was how, you know, once you embrace this idea of dividing yourself this way, you start creating a lot of energy that helps other people, and this energy then comes back at you, and then you sort of like surrounded by this amazing,
Mhm.
stimulating, you know,
Yeah.
circle of you know, people. And I also love the intergenerational
Mhm.
collaboration, you know, where I love, especially in jazz, uh, you can always put a young person and an older person uh, together, and you
Mhm.
always work if everybody's connected, you know,
Mhm.
through the same goal. I
Mhm.
think that's fantastic, you know, and this is what I do when I create during this summer. I create this weekly jam. We have one
Mhm.
tonight, and you know, people come over, we eat and we drink, and then we hang, and then when we're ready, we play. But when I bring people over, I always think about creating groups that are, you
Mhm.
know, intergenerational. I love that because I
But
think it's inspiring for both, you know, to have
mhm.
an older musician, a young
Right.
musician, both get something out of each other, you know.
But isn't it inspiring too to see what tunes the young guys want to play and what tunes the older guy would like to jam?
Yeah,
Sometimes
I mean, yeah, I
not
think
necessarily
that,
the same.
yeah, you know, but this is you have totally a very valid point. But what I notice is that in situation where people congregate just for the pleasure of music,
Hmm.
then the idea is, and it's unspoken, but I always see it. It's like, what can we do that could kind of take away that what you just said?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
what can we do that could immediately connect us?
Hmm.
And so the way I'm not putting rules to that, because I mean, it's a jam session. Who cares, right? So because nobody cares, that then I let it be, and I feel like when you let it be, things sort of like people start finding their space, and then so the way it works is like we start playing and we stop, you know, after 2 3 hours. We don't even talk about what we play. We
Hmm.
just start playing, and somebody just kind of goes from one thing to the other. And if you don't know it, then you will learn it. And if you know it, then you play it.
Hmm.
And so
Nice.
I love that. You know, I love that music can do that. You know, can really take away all these walls. You know,
Hmm.
because it's true, young people want to play different things, but at the same time, they love. I mean, the music of the history just as much. It's just, you know, they obviously feel like they want to have something that represent their generation and
Hmm.
certain town, and I think that's very healthy. But I don't feel like it's a limitation when you put older
Hmm.
young people together. It's actually the opposite. It's just
Yeah.
like fascinating.
Hmm. It is. Yeah.
But you have to create the right climate where
Hmm.
people don't feel judged, don't feel like,
Hmm.
you know, it's like, no, if we're just sharing music, then it really doesn't matter. We don't even have to play jazz. You know what I'm saying? We
Hmm.
can just play like a Beatles song and then make it into something. You know what I'm
Just
saying?
play
It's just
music.
like,
Yeah. Hmm.
right. We are the one creating all of this very rigid, you know,
Hmm.
and and I think music shows us a very different path, you know, if we're paying attention,
Hmm.
you know. And that to me, it's that really sort of like excites me, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. And to go back a little bit, how long did that Puerto Rican phase last?
Yeah,
And
there
before
were it was the magical number of 7 years.
7 years,
After
good
after
cycle.
7 years,
Hmm.
I got called to come and co-direct this program here in Boston, the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute.
Hmm.
Um, that the program whose artistic director is Danilo Perez, the legendary Panamanian piano player um, that played, in the last Wayne Shore reported until, last year, basically. And now Wayne is not playing anymore, but um, he's still doing things and they're still collaborating. Actually, they did the opera and Danilo was playing with John Paritucci and bass and the opera. I don't know if you heard about the opera that Wayne wrote,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Engineer. Anyway, so then after these 7 years, I created enough projects and energy and vibration for people to notice what was happening there. A lot of people used to come to my festival or to my program, and so when they opened this program at Berkeley, they asked me to come and become the managing director
Mhm.
and to work and with Danilo. That was 13 years ago today, and it's been incredible. It's such a we have such a partnership that is has survived a decade, and we're more and more connected into what we're doing. The program has really shaped up to become one of the most important program for especially jazz in terms of creativity, right? Not just in terms of like replica of something that was happening in the 50s and the 60s. This idea to create a space for young people to bring their own culture, bring their own idea, and kind of exchanging this and creating new sound into a context of thinking of music as a powerful tool for social change, for education, for politics, for human development, for interconnection with arts, interconnection with science. And so we do all of that. It's like it's a very forward thinking institute that houses within the college, the Berkeley College of Music.
So you're in that program, or you were teaching on the other Berkeley as well. Um,
No,
so you specifically for that program.
I came back in 2009,
Hmm.
and we started the program in 2009, and that's all I did
Hmm.
was, uh, you know, directing the program, uh, co-directing the program, I should say, especially for all the part, like all the logistic and all of the, curricular interconnection and adaptation, etc.,
Hmm.
and teaching some of the courses. And another important point of what I do is also mentoring the student, advising, um, bringing the student around the world, make them play in festival, make them play in prisons, make them play in hospitals, make them play in, around the world, and always make them experience this idea of what's the difference when you play at the Blue Note in New York and the day after you go and play at a retirement place for older people. What are the connection there? What is music? How as a musician you can impact the world beside making record, doing record, and having tours. What else can you do?
Hmm.
And this is something about what Danilo Perez brought to the college, that it was a very, back then, a very different way of looking at music. And nowadays I feel is in the mission of the college, this idea of looking at music as a powerful social and cultural, tool for betterment of society, right? And not just I'm going to a conservatory or college to learn all these skills and then become, the first, the best of, or having a record deal with Blue Note or whatever. So you really sort of changing the purpose of why I become a musician. What
Hmm.
else is there? We all want to play music and we all want to have records and tour, but what else? If we have this talent, what else we could be responsible for with this music?
Hmm.
And so teaching young people how to see themselves as activists, not just as jazz musician or entertainer, but as
Hmm.
music activities where they use music to create project, to create awareness, to interconnect areas that are disconnected. And so that's, it's hard to explain in few words, but that's why this program is what it is. It's just unique in many ways.
Was it your idea to bring that new flavor to Berkeley,
No,
or?
no, not at all. I mean, this is really Danilo as artistic director. He was very clear that it was not okay when they offered him to lead this institute as artistic director. He
Mhm.
said, "I'll do it, but I wanted to make sure that this is, I introduce an idea of a purpose that is different about what the
Mhm.
school is doing."
Okay.
And the school said, "Do whatever you want to do."
Mhm.
And but worked for me that without being as focused as he was in Puerto Rico, I was already doing a very similar thing, and I created a very similar environment
That's why I
within
thought
the,
maybe
yeah. And
you
so there
took
was,
that one place further too.
yeah,
Yeah.
there was, but I cannot take credit of what it was, of this vision, because that's really his vision, and is fantastic. But I resonated with it because
Sure.
in a way he sort of codified something that I was already
Hmm.
experiencing
Hmm.
in a smaller, in a different way.
Hmm.
But to me was already so much part of how I was seeing myself as a musician, because as I said before, I always thought music was kind of a bridge and not just like a platform, for me,
Hmm.
and I always felt that.
Hmm.
And so when I start connecting with Danilo, to me was like incredible. It was just like finding a completely new dimension on how to see myself developing, um, as a musician and as an educator and as a, and as a human being, because I mean, you're a musician, so you know how much being a musician is a 24-hour thing. It's like it never leaves you. There's not something like, okay, I finished my job and now I go home and do another thing. Like you know, the thing about being a musician that you interconnect your, human existence in a
It's you,
way.
yeah. Hmm.
And that's also scary. That's why there's so many dysfunctional musicians, because many times we equate how well we play to how well of a person I am. So I'm taking a bad solo, and all of a sudden I feel like crap. I'm like, man, oh, I want to die. And the first person that kind of showed me how dysfunctional this was Kenny Werner, because Kenny Werner says like the way you play and what you are as a human being has nothing to do. This is like our dysfunctional way
Hmm.
of seeing ourselves. But the point I was making is that we do overbring this with us. So finding this new dimension to Danilo in this work galvanized, the last 13 years of my life as a continuation of everything I was doing before. And mind you, when I went to Puerto Rico, Simon, my friends thought that I was crazy, because they said, "Well, why are you gonna go to Puerto Rico? Why you should go to New York? You should go to." And I'm like, why would I go where everybody's going, and nobody has room to do anything?
Hmm.
And so I did the opposite. So the wonderful thing in Puerto Rico that I had all this space to create things and to sort of test myself, learn new things, learn so much about music from a different point of view, and then come back and add something to offer. And I remember when I was recruiting faculty, I would immediately call all the musicians that were either, friends that I were in university with me, and I would say, "Do you want to come teach now in Puerto Rico?" And most people would say, "No, you know."
Hmm.
And you see that to me is something that I'm glad I didn't have that mentality, because I found myself now doing things and doing project musically and doing things educationally that I would never probably have possibly done if I would not done that 7 years of intense training in Puerto
Hmm.
Rico, where I
Hmm.
sort of I connected all this part of what I wanted to become. And so I feel that that's been a blessing, because now when I'm in my element and I'm around young musicians, they feel they're dealing with a person that is very well happy with his life and that has
Mhm.
a lot to give to them, and
Mhm.
not, there's not, you know that weirdness sometimes that you feel when musicians, when they are not happy with what how their
Right.
career is now.
Yeah, yeah. But what is your solution? But what do you tell them, or what did you find out for yourself that you don't have to define yourself only as good as the last solo was?
Right. So I think that it's partially what you tell them, but I think it's mostly what you show to them.
Mm,
I think that, especially young musician, they hear everything because, they're in most of the time input mode, so they're very open.
mm,
But within what they hear is also what they see. And I think that this is some about our program that is very, very experience based. So it's about creating an experience where they actually understand through doing, not through a lecture.
mhm,
Because we can talk about, okay, what is a musician in this new center, what is a jazz musician in new center, is, do we have the same model that we had in the 70s and 80s, or we had to create a new one? And we have this conversation, but it's not enough to talk about it, they have to see it.
mhm,
And so a lot of what we do, we create either musical situation or social situation or educational situation where they actually involve in person in doing something that they realize will change the way they look at music.
mhm,
And unless you do that, it's only words, right? And so
mhm,
this is very connected with a very important um, movement called constructivism in back in the 60s, where is this idea of education. Your student is not a, a bucket where you fill with information,
mhm,
but you are a facilitator, and students learn through things that relate to by doing. So this idea of like creating an environment where they sort of discovering things, and you as a teacher, you sort of like, all right, so okay, let's go to Dominican Republic, and we're gonna go there, and there's gonna be a major jazz festival, and you're gonna have to play next to a beach. Okay, great, and deal with all that. But then we're gonna go and play for an institute where they house kids with severe multiple sclerosis,
mhm,
all kind of disability, and these are kids that are abandoned by their kids, by their parents, because they didn't know how to deal with that, or maybe they were like young,
mhm,
single mother, and now they leave these kids on their own. So we bring the students, I'm just giving an example, to this place, and now they have to play for these kids, and it's like that's totally changed everything they understand about music, because all their little tricks that they do on stage, they don't work anymore. You know what I'm saying?
different solos probably.
Right. But the beautiful thing is when they see what they can do through music, and they see
Mhm,
these kids were not even moving, and now they're opening their eyes and they're smiling, and they're like kind of, then you really understand this idea of music as this spiritual energy, and it's
mhm,
like, oh, like we're priests,
mhm,
right? And we are like kind of like using it for the good or the bad, or
mhm,
for ourselves,
mhm,
right? And you understand through the experience that you know a lot of our way we are taught, or we're experiencing people that we admire, is like a lot of these musicians use music for themselves. It's like it's a self-validating thing. And when you're not playing from the point of view, when you're just always sort of trying to use it to have something resonating, then you start understanding the power that you may have, and how beautiful this is, and
mhm,
how responsible you have to be.
mhm,
But yeah, I cannot explain this to a kid, and he will say, okay, I get it. But
mhm,
until he's there, and he's surrounded by these kids, and he doesn't know what to do, and then he has to find a solution.
mhm.
you know?
Right.
And I mean, I have videos of all of this. I mean, we're doing things, like this in prisons. We're doing things in hospital. We
Mhm.
and in senior home, and then you bring them to play a major festival, and they realize it's like, wow, they understand if they play with that spirit in the major festival, then everything changes,
Mhm.
you know, because they're sort of over, they transcend what we are used to think about. Okay, I'm
Mhm.
gonna go in the festival, I'm gonna kill it. I'm gonna be like,
So you put
no,
them through the real school, like playing
yeah,
different kinds of things, different kind
yeah,
of gigs.
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and you have to surround them by good role models. People
Mhm.
that they admire and they see how they think about music,
Mhm.
and that to me is one of the most beautiful things at school. It's just like Giovanni comes here, and it's like, who is this man? It's like Santa Claus. It's like, man, it's like it's the most beautiful human being you can imagine, and it's so giving, and he plays and you cry because his sound just comes inside your skin. And but then you talk to me, and you can see it's like the most, Danilo is the same, John Patitucci is the same. It's like these people that have found so much love through music, and
Mhm.
they're ready to share it,
Mhm.
and so that to me is so important, because there's too many negative models, Simon. There's
Mhm.
too many negative uh expectation. I think social media is a great thing, but I mean, I can't even imagine being 18 and being bombarded by social media and seeing what everybody's doing and feeling like, what I'm saying. It's
Yeah,
so,
I get it.
we're living in such a strange time.
So it's about how music can touch your heart, basically,
Yeah,
too.
yeah. This is that's a premise, and the
Mhm.
second is, once you are touched by music and you want to become a musician, how can you create something that spread this positiveness that
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
embedded in music, if you see it that way,
Mhm.
and so our students, by the end of the year, they create projects that are incredible. I mean, they make connections of music, and they get inspired by using music for other purposes,
Mhm.
as you know, awareness for social change, for climate change, um, creating curriculum for kids, or using music um, to study the process of mental health, and music therapy. And meanwhile, you hear this music and it's amazing. It's just like this incredibly creative,
Mhm.
very high-ended project in music that has a purpose beyond being entertaining and
Oh,
being great
yeah.
music and being great solos. But you have to have the student going through a process of seeing themselves in this way, because
Uh-huh.
nobody trained them to see it this way.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I like the fact that it is about more than just the music, but what
Yeah.
what can you
But
use it for or do it
right,
with it?
Simon, and that's what I think, you know, resonate with a lot of young people,
Mhm.
because it's hard to I remember reading this interview on Downbeat, and somebody asked Phil Wood what he thought about jazz education. And he said, jazz education is like feeding rat to the snakes. I'm thinking, whoa, that's so dark, But I almost understand. It's like,
Uh-huh.
why would you have all these kids spending all this money to learn all of this, than to do what? Playing $100 gigs in a bar for the rest of their life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he has some
That's,
nice stories for what's about that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's
I
right.
know, but then when you look at it this way, it's all of a sudden it's like your purpose is not just to become the best person you can be through
Mhm.
music, which is very different to say to become the best musician. It's like the best person you can be through music,
Mhm.
and what you can do with that
Mhm.
that can help humanity, and make it as a responsibility, not as an optional thing. It's like, okay, what are you doing with your music
Mhm.
besides, the usual? What
Right.
else can you do? But think about it. Think about it. Um, Whatever you think, for instance, just talk about
Mhm.
famous musicians that have had an amazing impact. Uh, I'm thinking about Danilo, of course. I'm thinking about Wynton Marsalis, and I mean, he could have been easily spending his life just playing trumpet, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's that good that he could have a career just playing and doing records.
Mhm.
And here you go to New York, what he created there with Jazz and Lincoln Center. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
been there. It's insane. Like you go, you're in the in front of Central Park, in one of these gigantic building, and you have
Yeah.
he has built a whole floor where there's a jazz museum, three rooms for music, a jazz club, one mid-sized theater, another big theater. They have an orchestra rehearsing every day, and I went to see this rehearsal. It was incredible. It's just like
Mhm.
you enter, there's food, there's display, and it's just insane what he created. And of course, is because he was able to probably talk to people about the importance of music
Mhm.
and not just play the trumpet.
Mhm.
And every time you see something remarkable happening that creates opportunity for a lot of other musicians and creates energy for a lot of people to be benefiting from music,
Yeah.
it's always a musician that in a way see herself or himself not just as a performer but as an educator to the society, and showing them, make them understand the importance of support music and create space for music and use music for some certain kind of social
Mhm.
uh, um, purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to train the students to see themselves that way.
Mhm.
And then the students say, look, I just want to play my saxophone. I just want to be in a room
Mhm.
8 hours and play, and that's all I want to do. And cool, fine. That's
Mhm.
that's there's that's I get that.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Different things. Yeah.
But but the question is, what can you do that and see yourself changing the world through what you're doing? And
Mhm.
if not, why not?
Mhm.
I mean, and the why not is because how do you do that? Well, then you need to show them.
To leave the room. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, it's not as much as what we tell them, as much as what we make the experience and how much we model this behavior. I mean, look at
Mhm.
Danilo. I don't know if you know, Danilo created a foundation in Panama.
Mhm.
Um, Now it's I think 20 years, I think, and this foundation has all throughout this year getting kids from the barrios, kids from very low income, kids that eventually could have a high risk to be in gangs or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
And through music, it gave them a space. And now this foundation is housing. It's insane what it has become from the youth in
Mhm.
Panama, right?
Yeah.
And so it's such an example of what I mean. Danilo is another person. He could just play piano and have a career, right? I mean, easily.
Mhm.
But for him, that wasn't enough. So he's a UNESCO artist for peace. Is cultural ambassador for Panama. Create a foundation. He created a festival, and so everybody that is in that surrounding of that circle,
Mhm.
they see another kind of example of how to be a musician. They
Mhm.
see another purpose, because this is not somebody that cannot play. He's the piano player for Wayne Shorter. I mean, this
Mhm.
guy is a monster player. But what else he's doing with this gift, and that's
Mhm.
a little bit the thing that we're talking a lot
The
in the
message. Yeah. And the nucleus of the teachers, they are constant, and then sometimes you have a guest. Is that the concept or?
so the concert is it's a little different.
Mhm.
So we have selected a number of artists that share similar philosophy,
Mhm.
and they rotate and they come uh, on a weekly basis in rotation. And those are the artists. And then more and more we have alumni because now our program is 13 years old.
Mhm.
So a lot of our alumni are becoming our faculty. And
Okay.
so there's this combination where Giovanna comes five time a semester. John comes 4 times a semester. Danilo comes 5 times a semester. Ben Street comes 3 times a semester. So we have all these sort of people that come, and every week there's an artist or two artists,
Uh-huh.
and then there's a faculty that are either Berkeley faculty that started the program with us, and some of them are still with us, and more we are, every time we have a space, obviously, which is not often, but more and more like we kind of connect the alumni to come and teach in the program, because they sort of like learn this philosophy from the ground up. And so we're thinking, well, this is the future. These are the ones that are going to bring forward these ideas. But the presence of the artist is very important, because in a way, what the artist creates is continuity by coming, and sort of like coming periodically. Like if Joe Lovano comes 4 or 5 times in the semester, then every time he comes, he leaves something and then comes back and pick it up, right? And sort of like there's this idea of the old school of learning jazz from a mentor, not just from a classroom, exercise. So you have a major art kind of bringing that energy and making you see the music through their eyes, and so it's fascinating. It's fascinating, because it's again, it's this multi-dimensional, intergenerational, multicultural environment where everybody's sort of like resonating with each other. It's very interesting.
And I mean, besides that part, which is teaching, you're playing music, you're composing, you're playing gigs, you're recording music. What is the kind of setting that you feel most comfortable? I saw, for example, you recorded with, played with Eddie Gomez. Is that kind of and different people, like a rhythm section plus saxophone? Is that something you feel comfortable with, or you search for different things all the time?
I don't quite understand the question, Simon. Can you answer me?
We talked about teaching now mainly. Now I want to ask if you can share some moments in your
My
gigging
music,
career
right?
and your music
Yeah.
career and recording, playing stuff.
So yeah, you
Just
mentioned
like
Eddie. Eddie has been a very famous, a very important mentor for me. I played in his group for 10 years. We recorded his last album together, and then he recorded in two. My first album, he produced it, and he recorded in the second album. Um, and he taught me so much about aesthetics, you know, because it comes from it comes from Bill Evans, and that idea of sound, and that idea of beauty, and that idea of a certain sensitivity, and that was very important to me, as to have had this opportunity with him. Nowadays, I'm always trying to find different things that I want to do, and so I do a lot of different projects. Like um, I start seeing myself more and more as a vocalist through the instrument, and so that when I came out with my album Almas Antiguas, which is album came out in 2017, 18, and it was kind of selected by Downbeat as one of the best album of that year. And that gave me a lot of enthusiasm in continuing thinking what I was thinking, where I see a lot of modern jazz going into the direction, which is I like it. I really do, but very virtuosistic, very very, and a very kind of certain kind of aesthetics, and to me, to find a very different paths of looking at this idea of melodies, and looking at this idea of thematic, having inspiration out of things that have to connect with life and not with theory or with anything that has to do with. And so I started hearing in the last years a lot of singers,
Mhm.
because what I love about singers is like they have to tell stories. And
Mhm.
then when I hear all the old saxophone player, that's how they play. They there was always this idea of storytelling that I
Mhm.
feel is very much lost in a lot of modern jazz.
Mhm.
But that was such a part of what all the musicians that I grew up listening, I
Mhm.
realized they were doing, because they were listening to singers.
Yeah.
Nowadays, instrumentalists, they don't listen, singer are not point of reference anymore. Back then they were, and that's why you have Miles play the way he was, and you have Dexter playing it was, you have Lester. I mean, Lester playing, with Billie Holiday and that whole collaboration. But that was the whole environment where singer were singing the song, and then the instrumentalists were singing this, playing
Yeah.
the song to the singer. And to me, there's such a beauty
Yeah.
in that process, right? To look at music that way, and that to me resonated a lot
Mhm.
with everything that I hear. And so I try to I try to expand on that concept.
Mhm.
And Damas Antiguas was really, because for a year I listened only to singer. I wasn't listening, I just singer, and not
Mhm.
just a jazz singer. I would listen to Latin singer, Italian
Mhm.
singer, jazz singer, of course,
Mhm.
singer from the tango tradition, singer
Mhm.
from Brazil,
Mhm.
and then kind of connecting with the way they articulate, the phrasing, how they deliver,
Mhm.
even with the notes so much. I mean, you got a great singer, that person could sing a note and completely melt you with one note, right? And I'm thinking, how can you do that? How can you be so powerful?
Mhm.
Right? How can you, and singer have that, great singer,
Mhm.
right? And it's not about the shooby-doo, it's not about the scatting, it's about the power,
Yeah.
right? Of their, it's just like their voice coming from a human body and coming out and resonate with the other human being.
Yeah. But I think it's the thing that you're already doing and teaching by telling it's not only the music, it's that you play for handicapped people, that you care about your other human
I,
beings. I
I
think that
think,
comes out too.
Simon, I think everything is connected,
I think that's it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so so
So I'm sure
I,
you have it then. So
I don't know. I don't know if I have it, because
it's
I don't
like
know,
the same.
man. Every day I feel like you have to start anew. I don't know. It's a music. It's so interesting, and sometimes it's just discouraging. It's like, oh man, okay. It's like so very humbling. The moment you like, oh man, today you feel great, and then the day after it's like the read doesn't work, and it's like, oh man, what? I was I felt so great yesterday. But anyway, that's another thing. But yeah, so after Almas Antigua, my next project that just came out, I sort of like expanded that, and I say, okay, let me do another project now where I actually invite two singers,
Uh-huh.
and I play as a third voice, and piano, no drums. One of the singer play bass, the other singer play guitar. And so the story is a little long, but in short, I also write poems. And this person that invited me to play this concert say, I read your poems on your website. If you go to my website, the poems are like, you really have to look for them.
Okay.
And there's something liberating about doing things that you like. I don't consider myself a poet. And it's liberating. It doesn't matter if they stink or not. I just enjoy doing them, right?
Uh-huh.
But apparently people like them. And this person said to me, did you ever consider doing anything with your poem music? And I was like, what? It's just like it was there in front of me. It
Mm-hmm.
took
Mm-hmm.
somebody to say, hey, you do this, you play music, and you write this beautiful thing. Why don't you do something together?
Mm-hmm.
So that premise is like, it was the premise of this basically concert that was the poems telling a story and the music creating a soundtrack,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so these two singers were singing, and then we created this connection through the poetry. And so
Mhm.
we started with a monologue I wrote, and it was the concert. After an hour, we kind of went through this. It was almost like a book or like a play, you know.
But was it like spoken word, or was it
Yeah,
in a singing way, or
it was both. It
both?
was like music, you know, regular songs,
Uh-huh.
songs that I love, songs that I wrote,
Uh-huh.
and and then poetry with music, improvised. A lot of improvisation. I mean, it would be like maybe 60% improvised, but then it will be all these songs that we kind of connect chapter
Uh-huh.
by chapter.
Uh-huh.
Now, when it's the album is called Awakening,
Mhm.
and of course, the album, I could not put it out that way. The label would not let me do it that way. It's like, no, nobody's going to get this. You know, you have to put the track, take away some of the poetry, and blah, blah, blah. And
Uh-huh.
so I had to take away but the spirit is there because it's basically a vocal project,
Mhm.
right? And it's a vocal project based on love and based on this poetry that talks about love. And there's this whole, you know, development
Mhm.
of a plot that come and so for the record it became a different thing, but I still like it very much because there's such a lyrical element to it, and I even more play as a singer, you know, I'm playing even less, and there's this, it's all about the sound,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And that's they came up in April. Now in October I have a new project that's I'm super excited. But I this is very much in line of what we were talking, where I was commissioned by the Talbert Foundation, which is this international foundation housed in Sweden, and but the director is here in the United States, and through connection of scientists and all these foundation members, they approached me to create a project for awareness of climate change.
Mhm.
And what was exciting that, you know, they wanted to create a different narrative for the Glasgow com- convention that was just in October last year,
Okay.
and use music. And mind you, this is so interesting because usually it's our musician talking about this, but now these are politicians and scientists that came to us and say, "Hey, we need music to make a point,
Mhm.
to change the narrative, to create awareness."
Mhm.
And so I thought about this, and I thought, you know, this would be great to involve all of the musicians I'm surrounded with and
Mhm.
commission them music to write music. So Joe Lovano wrote a beautiful piece for this. John Paritucci wrote this amazing suite called Cielo, Mare, Terra, Sky, Ocean, and Earth.
Okay.
I wrote music for that. Terry Lynn came. And so basically, Chico Pinheiro, this great Brazilian guitar player from New York. And so basically, we did this recording with John, Joe, Lovano, and
Mhm.
myself, and Chico Pinheiro, and two alumni of the program, uh, Anastasia Petrova, this great Kazakhstanian piano player,
Mhm.
and Nadia Washington, that is also in my, you know, Awakening CD, which is
Mhm.
this amazing Afro-American singer. And so the whole project is about the environment and the planet. So the concert was called Jazz for the Planet, and
I
it
think
was
I saw that it was streamed or somewhere. It was. I saw that
yeah,
concert. Yeah.
it got more than 1 million views around the world
It was
throughout.
last year. Or when was it?
It was last year,
Yeah.
but now I'm gonna come out
So.
with the record. So we, you know, we sort of like edit it, and now
Mhm.
it's gonna come out with the record,
Mhm.
and the record by for Zoe Music in October,
Mhm.
and the name is gonna be Chant for Our Planet. So the initiative for the Talbert Foundation was Jazz for the Planet, and the album is called Chant for Our Planet. And
Beautiful.
I'm so excited about this because it's what made it beautiful is not just having all these great musicians, you know, contributing music, but as much as they felt the call, right? Because they felt the importance of
Mhm.
somebody that are politicians and scientists, and they're talking about this and looking at us as one of the answer,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
everybody that played in the project was just not a gig. It was not just a recording session.
Yeah.
Everybody was extremely
Uh-huh.
mindful of having an opportunity to use music for you
Bigger
know,
cause.
for an important cause, which is what we talk about the institute. You see what I'm saying? And for the student to see that was like also very, because then they also made a connection. It's like, wait a second, what it means is like you can get amazing opportunity outside of the music network, you see. And I have to say most of the great thing I did in the last couple of years were opportunities that were not coming within the music industry, where things like this where they're commissioned because people understand you're speaking a language that they resonate with, and they want you to be part of that, and they want to include music in that narrative.
Beautiful.
Yes,
So powerful. I mean, it just can reach everyone, even if you don't speak the language, right? So you can just
it does.
enjoy. Yeah.
And it gives so much motivation to us as an artist to have a different point of view, because I mean, Simon, don't you think we need a different point of view in this century? I mean, look at the things that happen in the world. I mean, I feel like the world needs jazz more than ever. They need music more than ever, but they also need, musicians that are like activists and involved. They understand the responsibility and the call for action in a way. And it can be. I'm not talking about. I mean, this is a major project, but it starts from your neighborhood. It starts from what you do in your community theater, or in your community, um, you know, senior center.
Yeah.
You know, it's this idea of not being home practicing, waiting for somebody to call. Be home practicing, but while you do, start thinking about what else can you do.
But that's great, because I'm not too familiar, but there were phases in jazz history where a lot of times it was an answer to politics or something going the wrong way,
Absolutely.
and now you have the chance again to do something like that, and
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really good.
I think jazz is such a there's so many examples of music activists in jazz. So many of the great jazz musicians were thinking of, and see, this is why I told you that's something that I discovered here, because it's like when I was in Europe, jazz to me was a cool style of music. You know what I'm saying? I did not understand the cultural implication and the depths of what this music represent for this culture, and where it comes from, and why out of this it connects. That's why the word global jazz, because it is really such a global music. Yes, it's true, it was originated in this country, but it's like it's global, and everybody has the room and the opportunity to create a sound out of that, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of education is focused on replicating things, replicating the way they were playing in the 50s and the 60s, which is not to say you should not learn out not to study that. But the purpose should be different,
Just one thing, yeah.
right? It should be to create something that at least is personal, right? It's something that, and that's what I feel like I want to do project now that they speak to who I am and to what I believe and to what I value. And I don't need to fit in a mold and don't need to be sounding like anybody. I just need to be really sort of like try and understand what motivates me to be keep on doing this and be enthusiastic, and then sometimes people notice and they notice there's something that you're doing that is you know that you're doing, and this is me, and that's my story. That's the most beautiful thing that I remember. Lovano teaching, one of the student came, and this kid could play just like he was imitating Joe, even the way he was moving, right? And he started playing for him, and Joe stopped me. I say, "Bro, what are you doing? You're telling my story. Tell your own story. That's my story." And I think that for him, for the student, that was the most important lesson he could have. Like, and he totally changed. I mean, the kid he is a talent enough,
Hmm.
to play like Joe Lovano, it means he doesn't need to play like, he should not play like Joe Lovano. You know what I'm
Better
saying?
change now, yeah, than later. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a summer break at the college? You have time to write more than usual, or
Well, I just actually was in a little break. I was
okay?
up in the Berkshires and I
Mhm.
get to see the Air, Wind, and Fire on Tuesday.
Mhm.
And I was at the Tanglewood, in the Berkshire. I took
Mhm.
5 days off. And so the summer, we always work, but the summer kind of slow down since I'm playing a lot. I'm
Mhm.
practicing, I'm writing.
Beautiful.
And the summer is a great time to sort of like re-energize myself,
Mhm.
and these little trips are also amazing.
Mhm.
And again, I went to see the Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I'm sitting there and I feel like I'm in church. It's like, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, what, how can these people groove like this? And it's just like insane. It's just insane.
Mhm.
And 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 the musicianship was incredible. And this is like a legendary band. And again, to me, they're so sincere in what they're doing even after all of these decades.
Mhm.
I was floored how great that concert was.
Mhm.
Anyway, coming back, summer is a time, I
To
am
breathe a little
still.
more than usual. Mhm.
Yeah, there's, right now there's no classes. The last semester ended in June. So it's mostly planning for the next
I see.
semester. And a lot, the
Mhm.
job is very big, but yes,
Mhm.
I have much more time.
Mhm. I mean, to write for that Talberg thing.
Yeah, that
That's
project
why
is,
I asked.
well, the Talberg Foundation, that was last year. So we recorded. Now the CD is coming up
Okay,
it's already
done.
done. But they're already talking about doing a second. So I'm starting to thinking about the second chapter,
I
you
see.
know
Great.
um and
Mhm.
and things like that. I did a concert. You're gonna enjoy this. This is crazy. That I did 3 weeks ago. I did this concert in Boston, and I put together magic and music. So my son is a very famous magician,
Mhm.
and my joke is like, Gogo, I told you musician, not magician. You didn't understand me, but that's the joke we have, right? So he came to visit me, and I said, you know what? What if we create a show where you open with magic and then I play, And again, I got a singer and a piano player, no drums for this one. And what happened was that people came, the place was full, and he started doing magic and put everybody in such a space where the audience felt already kind of this energy to being
Uh-huh.
one, like they experience an experience, right? So they collectively experiencing being this world of illusion that he creates, and it was incredible. So by the time we start playing, it was it was like literally being in a magic tale. And the
Mhm.
thing that happened were so surprising because of the energy that was created in this room and everybody experiencing at the same time. And I felt like this not many times. It's like once you create that sort of unity inside a room where music, and in this case magic, and everybody put you in this trance
Same
where
wavelength somehow.
it
But but
was.
but they were more focused for the music because they were ready, concentrated, or
Yeah,
something like
it
that.
almost, I was joking after, because I said, Simon, it almost felt like I was cheating, because by the time we play, they were so ready for us,
Hmm.
you know, so much more than having an opening act,
Hmm.
musical act,
Yeah.
because, the magic put them in this, in
Hmm.
this, all state, like they were like, so when we start playing, they were ready to kind of get the music,
Uh-huh.
and not, all the filter we had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Oh, perfect.
magic
Yeah.
took the filter away, and they were ready just to, man. And it was like the energy we felt on stage was incredible. And I said, I thought this was a crazy concept, Then it turns out that other people did it, and I need to research it, but I'm not the first one that put magic and jazz together.
Mm.
But I want to, I
What a
want to do
nice
it again.
concept. Yeah.
Right now, we're talking about how can we do it at the same time. Like how can
Mhm.
so I'm in my conversation with my son, and how can we do an experience where it's not you first and me after, but
Uh-huh.
we can actually make it combine? Could we? So we're thinking about this,
We
you
share the
know,
stage at the same time.
right?
Yeah.
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 Uh, I don't know, but it's exciting just to think something that
Yeah.
I never thought about before.
Gee. Yeah.
You
Great
know.
stuff. Yeah. It's very inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
I'm inspired, man. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, and I feel like after COVID, it was such a intense year, but
Mm.
like I really feel like what we do it's so important. We
Yeah.
need.
Especially with that, what you're doing with that, with those thoughts in the back of your mind always. Yeah. Very valuable. Yeah. I really enjoyed talking to you, Marco. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for, ha-
Simon.
for
I
having
this
that
was
nice
great.
chat. Yeah. We really
I don't know
enjoyed
if anybody's gonna listen to that, but hey, it was a pleasure to talk about these crazy
it.
things.
Yeah. It was. Yeah.
And if you send me a link, if this is gonna be published, let me see. I'll post it to my
Yeah. I
social.
will. I will tag you, and you will see it. Yeah. It's if that's okay for you.
And then it would be nice, when you are time, I like to know what you're doing. And I'm gonna be in Europe in October again.
Hmm.
I would love to meet. I don't know, and then
Italy
maybe
or where?
you. Right now, it's Basel. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
right now. Yeah,
Jazz
we're
campus
doing.
or what?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we're doing we're started a collaboration. They came here in April,
Hmm.
and we're gonna go there.
I will come there
Probably
if I can, if you know the dates.
that would be great.
Yeah, sure.
We're talking about the dates now. We
Hmm.
talking about the first week of October,
Okay.
I that would be nice. I like to know what you're doing and see your project as well.
Yeah, I look forward to meet you there. I'm sure it will happen.
All right, Simon.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you,
talking to
Marco.
you. All right, my
My
pleasure.
my pleasure, Marco. See you then. Bye bye.
Have a great rest of your